Okay, we are ready to go. Kelly Arndt, Gabe Biber, Amy Bigman, Kai Christensen,
Here.
Colin Cronin,
Here.
Kurt Dwyer,
Here.
Conrad Hittner,
Here.
Dory Lako, Janet Lilly, Lawrence Rosen, Tassin Sardar,
Here.
Joy Shantz,
Here.
Sue Webster.
Here.
Okay, great.
Person, you have quorum.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for signing in. This is the first complete count committee that we've tried to do via Zoom. I assume by now that you have had experience doing this in other meetings that you may be participating in. So thank you for being willing to do this. And if there are any problems or anything, thank you for your patience as we will try to correct anything that goes wrong as we go along. A couple of things I need to mention to you. So let me get my cheat sheet here. All members of the public, and I don't know that we actually have any members of the public tuning in at the moment, but all members of the public will have a chance to address this meeting during the public comments section. And we will talk a little bit about that later on. There are some changes that have been recommended that we will need to vote on. Second item is that in terms of the process for this meeting, because this is an official meeting and because of the nature of the mechanism we're using, each board member will be called on individually to speak during each item should they wish to speak to that item. So board members are asked to please state their names before speaking, making a motion, or what have you, so that we can accurately make sure that we have that we can actually record accurately what's going on. If you don't have anything that you want to say during any of the items that we address during the course of the meeting, you're certainly welcome not to participate and just say pass, and you'll be off the hook for that. All votes will be taken by a roll call vote, which means that Amy will be calling on each board member by name, and they will indicate their vote by saying yay or no. Are there any questions about that? Okay. All right. Well, if that's the case, then the next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes, and these are the minutes for the last full and official meeting we held, which was on January 27th, 2020. Before we go to the vote, is there a motion on those minutes?
This is Board Member Christensen, and I move that we approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
Colin Cronin, second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Any discussion or corrections or questions? Oh, hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of accepting the motion? Amy, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Rosen,
Aye.
Christensen,
Aye.
Cronin,
Aye.
Dwyer,
Aye.
Hittner,
Aye.
Shantz.
Aye, sorry.
That's okay. Webster,
Aye.
Sardar,
Aye.
Lilly, I think, let me check really quickly. Janet might be on, but muted. As a matter of, so that passes. As a matter of process, Mr. Chair, I think you also need to approve the agenda as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I passed right over that. Well, let's go back to that. But as far as you know, the approval, the minutes have been approved. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, let's go back to the agenda for today. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move. Hittner.
Second?
Dwyer, second.
Okay, any discussion of the agenda, any addition, any interest in adding additional items to the agenda at this time? Hearing none, let's call for the vote. Amy?
Rosen,
Aye.
Christensen,
Oh, by the way, everybody, please make sure to unmute when it's time to vote.
Aye.
Cronin,
Aye.
Dwyer,
Aye.
Hittner,
Aye.
Shantz,
Aye.
Webster,
Aye.
Sardar.
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously.
Okay, great. Okay, the next item is the financial report, and Amy, you're going to go over those items, please?
Yes, I am. So let me just scroll down for everyone for a moment. So here are the expenditures from the very beginning of when the committee began meeting and received financial funds. You will note that we actually received a grant award that I'm going to share a little bit more about, but the Michigan Municipal League actually gave the city of East Lansing a little more than $16,000 to support operations and staff salaries. So to kind of go back in time 3 months ago, we actually applied for the grant funds the Friday that City Hall shut down. So we applied for the grant funds on Friday and we'll be receiving those the following Monday. So we immediately, which is great news, but we immediately had to think differently about how we might spend those funds. So we have since worked with the Michigan Municipal League on launching a pretty comprehensive social media campaign that I'm going to share a little bit more detail about, but that's where we've been focusing a lot of our efforts on thus far. But you will see that there's a credit of $9,951.40. That is to reflect the operating cost. The remaining balance is going towards staff salaries. So I just wanted to make that clear that that's sort of our money that we can spend on outreach. So that is why that is a credit. The other things that we have spent funds are a couple of social media ads that we, the city, have paid for and, boosted that are separate from a Martin Waymeyer census campaign. And then Regine has actually been purchasing a little bit of swag that we can hopefully start to pass out maybe in August when things start to reopen and people start to kind of interact a lot more at the Hannah Community Center, for example, or the library or other venue activities. So those are our major expenditures to date. So we have $11,787.37. I will say this, obviously, the city had given us a balance of $10,000. If there, we do need to expend in the very least the full amount from the MML grant. So essentially you can assume that, we need to spend at least $9,951.40. If we have remaining funds left over, so if there are any general funds left over, so before we received the MML grant, there was $6,477.89. If we continue to have those funds, then that's frankly going to just go back into the general fund pot. And then the city can use that for other resources. So I just kind of wanted to make everybody aware, but we're in good stead financially, which is always a good place to be. And I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
The only question I have is, are there any, please refresh my memory, or were there any plans that had been put on hold to spend any of those dollars for either social media or swag that
Sure.
have not been actually implemented?
So the only idea we had, which is a great question, was to potentially do a postcard mailer to students. We actually put that as part of our MML grant budget, and they also like that idea. So I kind of wanted to have a conversation where we talk a little bit more about that specific grant award today, if we feel like it's still appropriate to do a mailing. There are certainly still students here, but, is it still appropriate to kind of do a mailing in the Delta Triangle like we had talked about in some of the higher rental populations, or do we think maybe we should spend some funds elsewhere? So that is the only thing, Larry, that we have not done yet. That was a discussion before COVID hit.
I was going to say, this is Colin Cronin. One other item that we were looking at was a lot of our leasing offices around town. Literally the week before everything got shut down, we were talking about, just putting some swag, some pens, some flyers, stuff like that out at all of our leasing office and counters where we had a lot of foot traffic on a day in, day out basis. But obviously that's changed dramatically also. So even putting out flyers and goodies, if you want to call it, is maybe not a good idea anymore either. So I think social media, in my mind, is probably the best way to spend the money, and anything electronic, anything digital.
This is Larry. Colin, can I ask you a question? Do you think, and I know you don't know this yet, but do you think in the fall there might be some resurgence of traffic in your in the leasing offices around town? Do you have any feel for that at all?
I mean, we're getting a little bit of traffic now, but a lot of it's still being done virtually in terms of leasing, showing, tours. But I think, I mean, it has picked back up. I think really with the announcement of MSU having classes again this fall in person, we saw an immediate surge in some of the electronic phone calls, even walk-in traffic that we did get once we were able to open our leasing offices again. And I do believe in fall, much to, I say, my displeasure even, I do believe the students will be out in mass doing a lot of the social things they have done in the past, gathering, walking, interacting. If for good or for better or for worse, yes, I do believe we will see traffic.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is that, we might, when we get to discuss this later in the meeting, maybe, we might want to consider that as well as social media, of course. So yeah, that we'll come back to that in a while. Okay. Any other comments? Or Amy, do you have anything you want to add to this?
No, I think that's all I really had at this point in the meeting.
Okay.
I have a question for Amy. Conrad Hittner. Amy, is there any constraint on the municipal league's funds in terms of when they need to be expended by?
Yes. So great question. So currently, the Michigan Municipal League is saying that their $16,000 worth of funding needs to be spent by the end of July 31st.
Ooh.
Now, yes. So that is why we've been pretty heavy on social media, because frankly, it's kind of easy to expend funds quickly. That being said, I personally have an email out on behalf of the city of East Lansing, as do multiple municipalities, to the MML saying, and graciously reminding them that, hey, the federal government extended the guidelines and the timeline of census. So are you willing to let us keep money through October? And I still don't have a good answer to that. I did reach out again today. I know that they're very busy over there. And my best response to that is that the game plan will be to try to expend the funds, but we're trying to be conservative. So, I mean, I still have money, if this makes sense. I still have, funds that we can hold back so that we could extend it out if we get that answer in the next 10 days or so, which is the hope. We did receive a correspondence from MML about 5 days ago saying, hey, I received multiple requests. We are working on it. We know that the state knows that you guys want to keep your funds longer. We'll let you know. And that's the most recent correspondence. But right now, everybody has to operate like they have to spend all the money by July 31st. Okay. So we're good.
Let me actually, as a follow-up, I know that the state has some skin in this game, and has the office that the governor's staff, I'm sorry, I don't remember the woman's name, but there's somebody on the governor's staff who's coordinating all this. Have you heard anything from them about these funds? Are they doing anything to represent all of the municipalities or localities that have received funds?
So I'm probably going to defer to Regine to see if she's talked to Carrie Ebersol Singh's office much. I can tell you that my main contact for the Michigan Municipal League funds, her first name is Lena, and she works for MML directly. And so that is who my contact is. It is not with the governor's office or anyone assigned specifically by the governor, because the funds, my reports, so I've had to report monthly on how we expend the funds. My reports have gone directly to the MML.
Okay.
I don't know if you have
And
anything.
to answer your question, Larry, if you are referring to the Michigan State Census Director, which is Carrie Ebersol, we have not received any notification or status of funding for our census. We do have our monthly meetings with the Census Complete Count committees from the entire Michigan, and the extension of funding has not yet been mentioned, or
Okay.
a question has not been addressed in regard to that.
Okay. Well, thanks. I think that's, that's important to know that if they're doing anything. Okay, great. Anything else?
Not
Anybody else?
This is Kai. So it's my understanding that there isn't a plan to do a July social media push in the neighborhood of that 3,500 right now. That would be something that we would need to vote on.
So the current idea, I guess I would say with Martin Waymeyer, is that they would geo-track East Lansing as a whole and also try to identify the population of student-aged persons. And so that is what we did during the month of June. And so that would be the continued push, is that it would try to go out to sort of the general region. Now, that being said, we've also done some things where we've, targeted like areas like Detroit, areas like Grand Rapids, areas where we know that there's higher populations of students. But there is no like social media ad, for example, that's supposed to be targeted towards Bailey right now, or Delta Triangle, or Chesterfield Hills. I would have to look into it. I'm not actually sure if we can drill down quite that specifically in social media, but that's certainly something I could find out. So right now the thought process is that would be sort of East Lansing wide, not specific to a track, correct?
I guess my question is more like, are we planning on having an expenditure in July in the neighborhood of $3,500 like we had in June?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. That is the game plan, is to have that be with Martin Waymeyer again. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Amy,
Okay.
Conrad Hittner with another question, maybe for a bigger discussion later, but anyway, I'll throw it out. Obviously, August 1st or August 15th or whenever the leases tend to start, everyone's going to have done musical chairs, or a lot of people will have done musical chairs amongst the student community. I assume we're still trying to figure out how many people were here on April 1st, right?
Yes.
And I'm going to let Janet speak to this a little bit more. So our verbiage, our messaging on social media, on our webpage, on an MSU webpage that has been created, is that students were to be counted where they were residing before COVID hit. So essentially the idea is that, if they were in East Lansing, a week before COVID hit, they had spent the majority of the year there, about 6 months in time frame, they were to be counted here. And that's all the messaging that we've kind of tried to share with them. We've done it a lot of different ways. We've done social media posts, web pages, blogs, newsletters, things with the alumni community. We're really hoping that message gets out, and we certainly have been able, and this will be an upcoming thing as well. We've been able to count all the students that lived in college housing. But yes, to answer your question, Conrad, that's what we've been directed to do per the Census Bureau guidelines. The Census Bureau guidelines said that we were to tell students to be counted where they were residing right before it hit. So
does sending stuff to street addresses make sense? Once we get to August.
Right.
I guess the answer is no. Or not. I don't know.
I'm not sure that there's any alternative, because for the most part, the way the Census Bureau is working this, and always has, is by address. And so I understand what you're getting at. If you have a student who is living in one residence, in an apartment in one part of town, and last spring on April 1st or around then, and then in this fall is living someplace else, that could be confusing. The Census Bureau's document that I hope everybody got a copy of it. I circulated it the other day. There, as Amy said, their guidelines are to look where people were residing at that time, and hopefully that message will get through. I'm hoping that college students are will actually read whatever materials that are addressed to them. So if not, there could be a problem, but hopefully they will read it and report where they were living at that time.
That's the hope. Yeah, we're trying to capture all of them.
So, okay. Any other questions or comments about this? Okay, if hearing none, the next item on the agenda is an issue regarding limitation of public comment to 2 minutes per individual. And this is something that we need to consider and actually vote upon. So let me read the notes I have here. The way that the city of East Lansing has determined that public comment at any public meeting such as this is going to be carried on is that each caller who calls in will be allowed 2 minutes to address the committee. The callers will be identified by the last 3 digits of their phone number, and when they are called upon, they will be unmuted. And I have actually sat in one meeting so far where that occurred, and you know, so far it's been effective. I haven't been in a meeting with a large number of public commenters, so I don't know what that would be like. But so far, at a small scale, seems to have worked. Let me go on. At the end of the 2 minutes, the secretary at the meeting will share that the 2 minutes has passed, and they will be placed back on mute. If someone who is in the queue decides at some point not to speak, they may indicate again by saying pass. This is not an absolute requirement, but it would be very helpful if whenever it is time for any individual to speak during public comment, they clearly state their name before addressing the committee. So it is my understanding, Amy, that the city will require us to vote on these guidelines. Is there these guidelines are just rules, and we have to address them by passing them. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, the committee could certainly choose not to pass it, and you could allow someone to comment indefinitely. But it's the recommendation of the city attorney's office that you limit it to 2 minutes, just because of the nature of the virtual meetings. So it is not required, it is recommended, and it is up to the committee whether or not they want to adopt that.
Okay. Is there anyone who is interested in making a motion to accept these guidelines as recommended by the city attorney?
This is Kai Christensen. I'll move that.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Tasin.
Again, thank you. And is there any comment? Any concerns? Well, hearing none, I'll call the vote. Amy, would you read?
Yes.
Would you go through the roll, please?
Sure. Rosen,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Cronin,
Yes.
Dwyer,
Yes.
Hittner,
Yes.
Shantz,
Yes.
Webster,
Yes.
Sardar,
Yes.
Lilly.
Yes.
Perfect. That motion passes unanimously.
Great.
And I can tell you, Mr. Chairperson, that there is one person in the queue. So when you are ready to open the public comment period, there is one person.
Well, let's go ahead. Let's hear from whoever's in the queue.
The person I have on record is Ann Hill. Ann, I have unmuted you, and you have 2 minutes to either address the committee or simply say pass.
Okay, thank you. I think you've addressed some of the things that I had a question about, just verifying that April 1st is still the date that we're using as far as where were they living at during then to be counted, or where were they living. Secondly, the group quarters, again, they're still going to be using that 4/1 date and not a subsequent date for where are they living. Third, students, and I think Conrad touched on this, students frequently move from one housing location to another from year to year. My concern was getting them to validate where they were living, and second, to make sure that there wasn't a duplicate counting. And I think that pretty much covers it.
Hey, Amy, this is Janet Lilly. I think Ann's second point, I just want to verify what she understands versus what we actually did. May I address it, or
Absolutely.
Is that not how this works?
Nope, that's
okay,
fine.
and Ann can still hear me, correct?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay. So, Ann, I didn't hear what you said about the second point. For the group quarters, which is just a point of clarification that's very important for MSU and any university participating in the electronic response for this year's census. One, it was the first time that the Census Bureau allowed universities to submit using registrar office information who was living in the halls. Now, because many students moved out when the university announced we were going online, and that was approximately mid-March, we did not use who was living in the halls on April 1st. That would have submitted a greatly reduced size of students living there. What we did is we backed it up to March 1st, knowing that the spirit of the census was to allow for who in a year was living 6 months or more at any one residence, and that would be their on-campus residence address, albeit for COVID. So we did not pull on April 1st. That would, again, have produced a greatly diminished number. We backdated it to March 1st. So I just want to make sure there's clarity and understanding. And as a result, we submitted 15,100 names in bulk to the census to be counted for East Lansing. Side note, we don't have record yet that that's actually been counted. I think that is part of what they're going to count towards the end of their count.
Okay, and that makes sense to me, using the March 1st rather than the April 1st. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
And I can answer your other questions.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
And everyone, Larry or Regine, feel free to kind of pipe in. Our understanding from the Census Bureau thus far is that, students were primarily to be counted where they were residing, as Janet mentioned, a couple of weeks before April 1.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had a situation where someone was residing in Bailey before and then moved to Chesterfield Hills after, the hope is that they're counted in Bailey. But the second backup is that hopefully if they haven't been counted yet and they don't report and they inaccurately report themselves in a different neighborhood, at least hopefully we'll still count them as East Lansing residents. That's sort of the end all be all goal, I guess I would say. And in terms of the group quarters process, I know Regine's going to talk about this a little bit later on, but during COVID, they were trying everything that they could from an administrative perspective to try to collect data from, for example, heads of Greek houses. There was some administrative offices that they could work with. So they've really tried to implement a digital process, but then for those that's not applicable, it might end up being with an enumerator and kind of paper and pen process with landlords. So just wanted to share that. Okay. That is the only caller that we have, Mr. Chairperson, to speak.
That was my question. Do we have any other speakers?
We do not.
Seeing that we don't have any, and I will just back up what you said, Amy. Having circulated that document. I think the Census Bureau is making it clear, and I don't have it right in front of me, but let me just put this in historical context. In the past, there was this almost an obsessive nature about looking at the exact day of April 1st as being the only day for which this decennial snapshot would be valid. But given the circumstances that we've been living with, the sense I get, and please don't hold me to this, but I think this is their sense, is that they're willing to be flexible long as we are, and everybody else is recognizing that we're looking for approximately April 1st. So a few weeks on either side. And if you think about it, if there are people who in fact misidentify where they were living at that time, the likelihood of that having any material effect in the long run is probably fairly minimal. So I think they've taken a more pragmatic point of view in saying it is better to get a more complete count rather than being sticklers for looking at only that one day. So, and as you'll find out, there are counts of other groups of people that occur at different times. For example, the homeless counts do not occur exactly on April 1st in those locations where there are a marked number of homeless people. So I think they've become a little bit more flexible in the goal of making this as complete and as relatively accurate as possible. So I'll get off my soapbox for a moment, and we'll go on to
Larry.
Yeah.
One more question. This is Colin Cronin. Sure. Again, back to maybe your comment on keeping with the intent of the count. I believe the answer has been no in the past, but in terms of getting as accurate numbers as possible, we've talked before about the off-campus landlords being able to somehow turn over some resident data to the government in whatever form they'd find reasonable, would be able to provide a pretty good picture in terms of probably the majority of off-campus residents. It's just, would the government be willing to consider that again due to the unusual circumstances this year? Don't know.
That's a question I can't answer. If I were them, I would say yes, I'd love to do that. But I don't know. I don't have enough insight anymore, and haven't for a while, of the people who are actually running this operation. There was a time when I did, but I don't anymore. So I really can't say. That would be very helpful. And the letter or that document I sent around implied that there would be an attempt to address that issue, but it wasn't through the landlords. And Janet, if you're listening to this, I believe that document that came from the Census Bureau just last Thursday implied that the universities and colleges around the country might have an opportunity to provide a count of students that they were aware of who were living off campus, but in the community in which the university or college is located. I don't know how far that's gone so far. And if you have any thoughts on that, or if you have any insight into that, it would be really appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. After you sent that to us last week, I contacted the president's office to see if they had received it yet, and they hadn't, so they're keeping their eyes open for it. At the university, and it's really not clear who they are communicating with. So we can double back with them to see, one, if the president's office has received it, two, if not, look at that actual letter, that was sent, and see if there's movement that we can use with that in terms of off-campus student addresses. One of the challenges with that, though, is there's nothing, unlike a lease for a student living on campus in one of our facilities or a group quarter, we know who's there because, they've signed the lease, so we have accurate record. One of the challenge with off-campus addresses is there's nothing mandating their accuracy with whatever address they have. That is a challenge. But I guess technically the Census Bureau would not know that. And no university probably has accurate records unless they require the student to give proof of address at some point every academic year. And I'm not aware of any university that does that.
Well, Colin, that when we find out more about that there may be an opportunity to, come back to you and see if your gracious offer, if it is an offer, or at least your suggestion might be workable.
Yeah, I think, it's a reasonable alternative given the unusual circumstances we're all in. Historically, landlords are fairly protective of the residential data, et cetera, but if it's limited, you get a name and address. For something 6 months ago, it's probably not a big deal. We could probably, have a conversation with the other landlords and see if everybody's comfortable turning that over.
Yeah, and I will say this: if there is a name, and an address associated with it, that may be enough for the Census Bureau to run their deduplication routines, where they look to see if the same person has been counted 2 different places at the same time. Again, that's a lot of that is black box kind of stuff. It's they talk about it, but it's how those procedures actually operate. It's your guess is as good as mine, but I have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they have some idea of how to do that. So yeah. Anyway, okay, well that's really terrific discussion, because these are really critical issues for our city at any rate. So anyway, Amy, we've gone into this business. Did we? Pardon my short-term memory lapse, but did we actually vote on accepting these rules? And that was a unanimous vote. Is that correct? Okay. All right. I thought I was having a little bit of a lapse there. Okay. Well, long as we got into this topic, I think it's a great segue to get into the next item on the agenda, which is asking Janet Lilly to give us an overview of what the university has been doing. I know you sort of just did a little bit, but if you want to go back to your notes and give us an idea of the extent of the attempts and operations that you've made to make sure that MSU students are counted, please, this is the time to do it. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And Sue Webster was my partner in all this activity as well, so she can hop in at any time. So clearly we were on track, like East Lansing and all the other municipalities, to really operate with a lot of activities around April 1st, and obviously that did not work out. So when the university announced mid-March that we were moving, I think it was March 11th that we announced that we were moving to online instruction, and we encouraged students, we did not tell them, but we encouraged them that they return home. I think on March 11th at 5 p.m., Sue and I were already working on these efforts to start collecting and messaging to students right away about what they needed to do as it related to the census. So within a few weeks' time, we had a dedicated website up directing students to the census and telling them how to respond, that even if they had just moved back to their permanent hometown, that they still needed to respond to the census with what their campus address would be. So this would be, and for any student, whether they're in East Lansing, Bath, DeWitt, Meridian Township, Lansing, they would have all been directed to that particular website. We also emailed all of the students living off campus, and Sue sent this from her email, so she gets some of the bounce backs and some of the questions, but 2 different dedicated emails went to all students, over 33,000 students, and that one went on March 18th, and another dedicated email went to all students on this day, April 1st. Additionally, we and I encourage you to listen to it. Sue did a fabulous job with this, and we sent the podcast out on social media. And then we also had our university communications office, and then we got approval from East Lansing that they were fine with the graphics. MSU developed some really cute, I think, graphics regarding why the census count was so important, and kind of giving a visual representation of the need to complete and our striving of that 50,000 population mark. So that was also used in a lot of channels as well. And then the provost, our interim provost, also sent another dedicated email to students that went out in April. So all students would have received 3, but knowing that we were closely monitoring the tracks, and Larry, I think you and Sue and I had a conversation in April as well. After that, we also sent specific messages to certain areas of students, namely international students and namely Spartan Village, and some other places as well, just to do some more targeted emails to students living in those areas, so that they could complete the census. And then, as I mentioned before, we did that data upload also in April, working for all of the students living in group quarters. And that was a completion, like I said, of 15,100 students, with following what the census is allowing us to say is a completed count. And for MSU students, they're allowing just name and address. And the reason for that, and why, if you're wondering why does that get a count as completed, it's because under FERPA, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, MSU is not allowed to disclose any non-directory restricted information. And so what that allows us, by our definition, was just name and address. And in talking with the Census Bureau back in January, they said that that would be sufficient for a count for our university population. So, Sue, what did I've kind of glanced over stuff, not in the exact same timeline that we did, but kind of hitting all the different points. What else would you like to add with some of the things that we did over the last few months?
I think that's been, your overview is quite comprehensive. I would add one thing on some of the targeted messaging. You mentioned Spartan Village and international students, but we did take a look based on our knowledge of where students live off campus. We did take a look at those specific areas and then reached out to those students as well. I think an example might be what we call the Delta Triangle area, where Michigan and Grand River split. There's sort of like really, it is literally a triangle there. And we were able to go in, take the streets, and then work with the institution to talk basically through email to those students, and once again, encourage them to go through and complete their census with their campus area, campus community addresses. So Delta is one example, but there were other places as well where we did that throughout the city, where we knew that there were pockets of students. So it was very targeted messaging as well. So I would just add that. But I think Janet's overview and the attachment to the email is, to the agenda is quite comprehensive. That's it.
Yep, thank you.
Janet, Sue, anything else that you want to share at this time?
No, I think.
No, I think that wraps up the efforts that we've had to date. And I think the next piece is, as you mentioned, Larry, is just seeing what kind of correspondence the Census Bureau is doing to the university as of last week that you shared regarding off-campus students. And so we're on the lookout for that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, before we get to that, I just want to, let me take the privilege, chair's privilege, just to say thank you for all of the effort. This is, as far as I know, this has been a long time coming. It's my understanding that 10 years ago, colleges and universities across the country very much were willing to do this, and the Census Bureau was very resistant to it. Well, I shouldn't say very resistant, but it was not something that they were comfortable with for whatever reasons. And so, number one, it's great that the Census Bureau is willing to use this approach. But number two, it's really terrific that Janet and Sue have been really so engaged in this and making sure that this happens, and making sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and all the administrators are made aware of what's going on, so that this could actually be reality. Thank you very much. I think on behalf of all of us, I can say that. So,
You bet. You're welcome. Thank you.
Very welcome. Glad to be a part of this process, which is really important.
Well, great.
It's extremely important. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's go on to ongoing business. And Regine, would you, you sent out with the packet for today's meeting that very nice listing, and I like the way you did it with the original official dates in regular type and then boldface type to show what the revision was. Would you be kind enough to just run through the highlights of this and let us know what's important here to look for?
Of course. Thank you so much, Larry. So for our updated federal government Census 2020 outreach timeline, in response to COVID-19, we have had to shift some of our census operations that were originally planned. The Federal Census Bureau has updated the census operational timeline and will continue to update it as operations resume on a daily basis. The updated operational timeline can clearly be found on the screen below, but also you can go online on the census.gov webpage to stay up to date with the most recent trackings. So for our self-response phase, online, phone, and mail self-responses is pretty much what this phase contains of. And the plan schedule was originally for March 12th to July 31st. However, the revised schedule will now be March 12th to October 31st. Our group quarters, which will consist of e-response and paper enumeration, was originally planned for April 2nd to June 5th. However, the revised schedule is now April 2nd to September 3rd, so that process has been extended. The non-response follow-up, which is also referred to as NERFU, census takers will interview households in person, and new dates will cover areas previously scheduled for early NERFU. The planned schedule was for May 13th to July 31st. However, the revised schedule is March 12th to October 31st. Our in-person group quarters enumeration, which remain a part of the in-person group quarters enumeration process, was planned to take place April 2nd to June 5th, and it is now scheduled to take place from July 1st to September 3rd. Our service-based enumeration, which service providers at soup kitchens, shelters, and regularly sheltered food vans will be counted as they are individuals who benefit from these services. The planned schedule was March 30th to April 1st, and the revised schedule is now September 22nd to September 24th. In our mobile questionnaire assistance centers, where the Census Bureau staff will assist residents with responding online at places that people gather, for example, community events and grocery stores. The planned schedule was for March 30th to July 31st, and the revised schedule is currently still being modified, and as certain places resume operations and shift according to how we continue to monitor our COVID conditions, that plan will more than likely be consumed on a place-to-place basis. And so as of right now, there are no dates in Michigan for when these mobile questionnaire census centers will open and resume. So that's more so will be tailored to specific areas. And staff looks forward to discussing this revised timeline more in detail as we go through our monthly meetings and continue to meet now that we have extended timeline for our census. And with those updates that we have, the Lansing area census office will also serve as one of our main resources for getting this information, in addition to the website that I gave you all.
Are there any questions? I have one very quick question. It just appears from the schedule you described that the Census Bureau at the present time is planning to conclude all of its data gathering activities by the 31st of October. Is that correct?
For the non-response follow-up?
Yeah, well, I guess I guess for everything, but
yes. So once NERFU takes place and enumerators go into the communities, it's that's pretty much the final rounds of collecting information, following up with group porters and individuals who had not had the opportunity to respond. But pretty much as far as planned operations, as of now, October 31st is the end date.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll wait and see what happens with that, but presumably that's it. Okay, great.
And Larry, if I can interject,
Sure.
our understanding is that the Federal Census Bureau will collect all of the data. Everything will be uploaded and collected. You know, initially, the President of the United States receives the census count on December 31st. Now it's been shifted to the end of April. So just to make everybody aware of that. So sort of the implementation, the data gathering process will end at the end of October, but the actual census count data information will be presented to the President in April of 2021. So just hear that.
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, definitely. Any other comments or questions about this? Thanks, Regine. That's terrific. It's good to know that.
Larry, I have a question if I can.
Sure.
Conrad Hittner. Do we know at this point the split is, as it were, between county addresses and student addresses that have been non-responsive thus far? I mean, do we know where we need to direct our rather considerable assets, I guess, to getting things complete?
The answer to that is sort of, and boy, and thank you very much for asking that question, because if you look at the chart that's on the screen right now, and I know that's hard to read, it's very small. I don't know if there's a way to make that bigger, but hopefully you have your own copy. Oh, thanks, that's great. The Census Bureau has been putting out for the last 2 months or so, more or less, weekly updates on the percentage, the response rate percents based upon their estimates of how many addresses, or their count of how many addresses there are in each of the localities around the country. And they have made this available for all different kinds of geographies, including the census tract. And if you know anything about census tracts, ideally they represent sort of homogeneous areas, but they don't always. And over time, these things change as population changes and so on. But still, I was able to look at their data, and this is publicly available online. So if you're interested in looking for this information for any community you know of, any community you're interested in, any place in the country, you can get online and look at the response rates from the Census Bureau. And you can get that information up to about a week ago. Anyway, I took the opportunity, I've been tracking this a little bit, and I sent out two tables, and one of them has the fact that Michigan is in the one of the top 10 states in the country for, it's not on this chart, but Michigan, it turns out, is I think the 5th highest responding state in the union, which is fantastic for us. That's terrific. So we've also looked at the response rates for the counties in this area. The state of Michigan, as you can see in this chart that Amy has up right now, is leading the nationwide rate of response. And then each of our counties, at least Clinton and Eaton County, are exceeding the statewide rate. And Ingham County is just about at the statewide rate. And take into account that does not include, as Janet Lilly and Sue Webster were mentioning, that doesn't include the 15,100 students that they have identified for the Census Bureau. So plus, and I can show you why that is in a minute. So, and if you look at the bottom of that chart, you can see that the city of Lansing, which I have attended a meeting of theirs recently, they are gung-ho on getting all of this information as much as they can. They're working with a variety of organizations. City of East Lansing isn't quite there, but we're close. So let's, Amy, can we just go back to the East Lansing census tracts and forget about this stuff? There we go. that's a very long way of answering your question, Conrad, and I apologize for talking around all this. But I've identified all of the census tracts. There's one or two here that I'm not completely sure of. The Census Bureau says they're in East Lansing. I don't see it, but be that as it may. The census tracts in East Lansing that are shaded yellow are census tracts that as of June 16th, were above 70% in terms of response rate. The ones that are shaded green are census tracts in the city of East Lansing that came in between 60 and 69.9% in terms of response rate. And then the ones that are in blue are the ones that we really need to have some concern about. They're the ones that came in below 60%. And if you look at these 5 tracts, these are by and large census tracts where students live. It's not exclusively student housing, but the triangle area that's been mentioned and the student housing that's down in off of Hagedorn on the east side of campus, Spartan Village area, the Flower Pot area, which is largely has a lot of residential, town residential, but also has the 1855 place house and some new housing that's been built in the last several years. And then all the way down at the bottom, tract 112, which is Chandler Crossing, that student area north of Lake Lansing Road. These are all areas that are primarily or largely student housing areas, and the response rates are terrible. The highest one of the 5 is 41.4% as of a week ago or so. So these are the areas which we have, I shouldn't say we, but Amy and Janet and Sue, through their efforts, have all been focusing their attention. And these are the areas which I believe we're going to have to continue to focus attention in the future to make sure that they all get counted. One quick note, the area in white, the census tracts 44.9, 91, 92, 93, and 94 are all on campus, and they are dormitory areas. And that's where the 15,100 students live, by the way. So we don't have any rate for them because they haven't actually been counted yet, but presumably it will be close to 100% for those areas, theoretically. So that's the very, very, very long answer to your question. And I hope that's understandable. I haven't led anyone astray with this.
So if I'm reading this table correctly, does that, I mean, are 1855 Place and Spartan Village included in the university's administrative upload or not?
Not. They are not.
It's a combination. So portions are and portions are not. I say that because some of 1855 Place is a group quarters and then some is not. 1855 Place has different kinds of living units in there. So there's apartments, there's townhouses, and there's family housing. So in the apartments and townhouses, those portions where we know that each of the residents in there is an MSU student, then those were included. In the family housing, where one individual living in a unit might be a student, but they might be married to or living with others who aren't, that was not. So the Census Bureau did not count that as group quarters, the family housing. So that's the difference with 1855 Place as a whole, is there's different types of housing there. So some were and some weren't. Spartan Village, again, is like it was last time, non-group quarters. So that was another reason why we did extra messaging both to the family housing as part of 1855 Place and Spartan Village for the individuals who live there. That's where we did some extra messaging in mid-April.
I'm very glad you brought that up because I will stand corrected. My understanding was that the upload was only dormitories, and obviously and you've mentioned it a couple of times today, so obviously that we need a little bit of adjustment here, but generally speaking, we know where to focus our attentions in the future. Other questions? I will try, I will periodically update this, and I'll try to get this information back to you all as the information comes out. I will say this, I mean, it's not a whole lot of an improvement, but it is interesting to see that at least even these little tiny increases occurred between May 26th and June 16th. That's just a couple of weeks. And so my guess would be that some of the messaging is reaching somebody because there's a slightly increased response rate closer to today. So hopefully this will continue with or without any of the activities that are planned. I'm really glad you brought that up, Conrad. That helps clarify it for me, and so I appreciate that. Anything else about this? We have a couple of other items. I don't want to keep everybody too late today. There is another item on the ongoing business regarding Michigan Municipal League, and it's the census grants. And we've talked about this, but Regine, I'm going to throw it back to you and let you, if you have any other comments or you just want to reiterate what you had said before about the grants, or Amy, for that matter, if you have something.
Sure. I think that, you know, I had mentioned a little bit earlier on that, you know, we've really been trying to focus our efforts a lot in the social media because we've known that a lot of the financial support has been needed to be expended quickly, as we talked about before. You know, I guess that our big question to you is we're probably going to have about $3,000 or $4,000 flexibility here in the next month or so. And so if board members did have a strong opinion on, you know, well, should we maybe try a targeted mailing? Should we try that? Does that seem worthwhile right now? Or, you know, are there poster materials or something, you know, we should give to Chandler Crossings or a mailing to Delta Triangle? Otherwise, I think staff will just really try to continue on with social media emphasis and, you know, give out swag as it's appropriate and safe. So that was really the one item of feedback that we were kind of seeking through all this. So I welcome any comments, or if people just want to see continued social media, that's how we'll spend the funds.
This is Kai Christensen. I have a question related to like the overall response rate that we need to achieve the 50,000 plus for the city. What is that percentage? Like what's our goal percentage overall? Yeah, so I guess in terms of, maybe I'll start with this, Kai. So right now, according to the demographics, we're at 59.5% response rate. So let's call it 60% to be close. When you figure the 15,100 person upload that's going to be factored into that, which is not right now, in comparison to the whole East Lansing population, we are likely, we could add an additional 25 or 30%, if that makes sense. So really, from a staff perspective, we're running a lot closer to 85% response rate of our population. Does that make sense to everybody? Based on a population of 50,000. So, you know, if we're at 85 or 90%, I think that that's a lot of pride for everybody on this committee to have thus far. Our goal, though, is certainly to try to continue to reach out, particularly in those targeted neighborhoods that Larry had talked about. But with the understanding that those are really difficult tracks. And to be frank, it was similar tracks last time in 2010. And so a lot of that does ultimately oftentimes end up being the Census Bureau going door to door and having the enumerators get that data. You know, we want to try to get that as soon as possible, but sometimes it just really does require the enumerators knocking on people's doors. So does that answer your question, Kai? It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me, I went to the, if I may, just to give you some idea about how we may go about doing that. And that really takes us into our last topic, which is future plans for, let's see, what's the exact title here?
Larry, while you look for that information, can I think Amy asked for her opinion if we can target the particular group that is lacking. So Chandler, for example, is there a way to electronically reach them through their apartment management folks?
I don't have an answer, but I am happy to reach out if that's kind of the directive the committee would like to give staff. We're happy to reach out and say, you know, if we, for example, spent some census posts, would you be willing to send these out to your community members? I think that'd be a great idea.
I'm just thinking aloud here because chances are likely maybe they're not even residing there anymore. They're all traveling back to their homes.
Sure.
Yeah. So sending out mailers may not be effective. I don't know if social media can target those areas specifically. That might be hard as well. And lack of that, I was just thinking aloud if the apartment management would be willing to assist in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'll comment on that real quick. And even Amy, when you were talking about the enumerators going door to door in the fall, that probably won't be very effective. I mean, in the student market, in terms of how many people are actually living where they resided last year, if you get a 20-25% renewal ratio, that's actually fairly high. So 75% of the students are going to be moving different places across campus. They'll still be in town, but knocking on someone's door, it's not going to be where they lived in April. So the best way to reach out to them is going to be electronically, either email campaigns or even direct text messaging, which we've got with all of our residents. Most property management companies do. It's just, what are you going to be able to send to get somebody to respond? Is there a good call to action to generate an activity versus, oh, hey, here's somebody telling me to do something again, heck with it, I'm not going to pay attention. That's always how to get their attention and get them engaged and get them to respond. But yeah, it's got to be electronically in my mind.
Yeah, I think I agree. I attended the City of Lansing's Complete Count Committee meeting last week, and they're targeting census tracts in which they have fewer than 60% response rate as of now. And I don't think this is, I think like in East Lansing, it's the same areas that they've had to examine more closely before. They have a variety of things they're doing, but they're not dealing with a transient population the way we are. So they're talking about, let me see, door hangers, putting things on doors, putting up flyers, laundromats, lawn signs, and a variety, and using all of the infrastructure of the neighborhood groups and community groups and churches in the City of Lansing. We can do some of that, obviously, and that may have some impact, but ultimately, I think for the kind of transient people we have, Colin, I think you're absolutely correct. We're going to have to use social media because it may be the only way we can get that message to the right people, more or less.
And even a good portion of the leases are going to be expiring end of July. So in terms of, I mean, the two big turns, there's an end of July turn with an August 1st move in, and then a late August turn with about an August 26th, 28th move in sometime around there also. So really, trying to get a hold of the kids in the next 30 to 45 days in terms of where they're living now is going to be the key. Otherwise, they got to, go back and retrace where they were.
Yeah.
Lynn, do you think if we did like a poster or something that we could give, for example, to DTN and put in their mailboxes, do you think they would be responsive to that or not really? Do you think they just think it's another piece of junk? And
posters right now probably wouldn't be very effective. I mean, they just, driving parking lots and, watching the properties, there's probably less than 50% of the kids are even here right now. Some properties are down to 25%. So in terms of how many students are actually in town living where they were, it's pretty low. The further you get from the core of campus, they might be a little bit higher because they actually have jobs and they're doing other things. But the main, sophomore, juniors are largely not around right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my guess would be that we're going to have to do a lot of our focus in September and October when students are back. because I assume you're correct that we're just not going to have much luck at all before that.
Yeah, unless the other landlords are willing to reach out electronically and use, both their email list. Of course, MSU has everybody's email also. We may have the additional tool of text messaging, but outside of that, it's going to be tough.
Larry, Conrad, without looking back at your chart or having it in front of me to see it, one of the things that sort of jumped out at me was that neighborhoods that I think of as towny neighborhoods, so White Hills, Old White Hills, etc. You're seeing response rates like in the 70s, which is great, I guess, or relatively speaking. Is there any point in sending mailers out to those relatively stable residences to cajole further participation, or are those addresses going to be ones that you simply got to send an enumerator out to get that head count?
In my opinion, I think we do need to reach out to those too. We don't know whether that's good or not, because in the past, all of this was all, by now it all would have been done except for cleaning up the odds and ends by having people knock on doors. So God knows. I agree with you though. I think, for the, what we want to achieve for any number of reasons, I think we don't, and I hope we didn't give that impression that we're not ignoring the residential neighborhoods, so to speak, the towny neighborhoods, just to focus on the student neighborhoods. I mean, the student neighborhoods are very important. I don't know if 75% is good. My guess is it's not. Way back in the back of my mind, I would imagine by now we would have been up in the 85% range, for all I know. So yeah, we need to still find ways to reach out to people who live here full-time permanently. So yes, and I think we need to talk about that a little more in the next couple of weeks. So Amy, I don't know what your schedule is or anything, but I think after this meeting, some of us might want to touch base and have a few phone calls and see what we can do in the short term versus the long term, which will be focused mainly on students.
Yeah, certainly we could discuss a mailing, it's what we had talked about before, but maybe we change some of our directions so that it's not necessarily student focused, that it's more broad range. Certainly. And, I know, I think Mr. Hittner serves on this, but, I don't think we've done a reminder to the Council of Neighborhood Presidents in a while either. So that might be something good to, remind the neighborhood presidents also that, hey, please don't be ambivalent to this. This still really matters. And please encourage your residents and fellow neighbors to fill this out. So, okay. So that's helpful. So what I'm hearing is still a major emphasis on social media, which is what we currently have budgeted, but maybe the discussion of some mailing pieces as well. I think to Colin's point, we could also look at some text messaging options. So great.
Hey, Amy, Colin here again real quick. And I mean, I guess I don't mean to say that, hall posters won't work. There obviously is some student population here. And I think we do need to take the approach of whatever we can do, we should try and throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. So, I mean, yeah, if there are 11 by 17 wall posters, whatever, obviously we've got a lot of hallways. Soon you guys obviously have great relationships with all the landlords in town as well as we do. If there is something we can pass out, distribute, have everybody, post up in a few places, anything is going to help. And I think the effort needs to be everything and anything we can do.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, there's only one other thing left to discuss today, and that is not on the agenda. And I just want to mention, you've all by now probably are aware that Regine is leaving us. She's going to be taking a job, I believe, after the end of June. Is that correct, Regine?
You are correct, Larry.
Okay, well, at this time, I would just like to wish on behalf of everyone, and please don't let me hog this announcement, but, you know, I just want to
Larry, we may have lost you. Well, I'll continue until Larry gets back. How's that, guys? Let me say this. Regine has been with the City of East Lansing for 1.5 years. She has been extremely dedicated. She is our census
for all of the help you've provided, and wish you the greatest success in the future. And if we can ever steal you back here for some reason or other.
Continue, Amy.
Should I get back in again? She's just been marvelous. I can't say enough good things. She's really been a census advocate. She's brought some creative ideas, and she's been exceptional in presentations and with grassroots efforts and with others. So on a personal level, I have to say that she's wonderful. We're extremely sorry to miss her, but I'm so glad that she is graduated and is moving on to new opportunities. So I just wanted to say that from a staff perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I really appreciate you. And thank you so much, team. I am definitely going to miss all of you. This has been a wonderful opportunity. Literally, words cannot explain. I was so shy and timid when I first came into this position. And, you know, this is my first time helping lead and even create a board. And you all have just been very patient with me and provided your assistance and resources on things even outside of census that has helped me with my educational success as well. And I'm just very, very appreciative. And I really look forward to seeing you all again. I'm very sure that I will in some capacity or another. East Lansing has a special place in my heart. And so I'm sure I won't be able to get away for good. I'll definitely come back and visit. It's sad that we, you know, couldn't meet in person and we had to have this over Zoom, but I'm glad that those of you who were able to make it today did, and I was able to see your faces at least once before I do complete my term here with the city. And so just thank you again. You all are greatly appreciated. And even though I will not, you know, really be serving with the team in East Lansing, I'm always there in spirit, and I'm a census advocate for life. And so something else I do want to share with you all is since I've transitioned from East Lansing, I'm also working on census initiatives for Detroit, Flint, Grand Rapids, Benton Harbor, and Lansing. So I'm still in some capacity, still continuing on with the census, which is even more exciting. So thank you again, and I really appreciate everyone.
Well, thank you, Regine.
Thanks, Regine.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
So while Regine is leaving us, I guess I kind of wanted to, and if Larry doesn't get back on, there's been a lot of discussion, as you can imagine now, since the Census Bureau has extended its timeline to October 31st. You know, this committee, our game plan was that this would be our very last meeting. That was that was the initial commitment of all of you. So there has been some discussion at the city's administrative level that you know, if this committee is willing to continue to meet, maybe we would do so just once a month. So we wouldn't have subcommittee meetings, but maybe we could just get together once a month for an hour or so and kind of brainstorm or talk about things. Recognizing that there would be limited funding. You know, if the MML lets us extend our funds, we would still have some funding and capacity. But I just kind of wanted to share that with everyone. And you know, so if that is of interest to people, I thought that maybe we could do like a Zoom poll. I don't want to put anybody on the spot right now, but maybe see if people might be willing to make that through the summer months and maybe, you know, just meet through October. So again, certainly, you know, I guess that's sort of what we wanted to share, was that we'd like to try to maybe continue to meet in a capacity for an hour once a month. But if others can't, you know, if we just simply don't have that commitment level, we understand that. But we recognize that things have just changed so differently and so quickly that we're just kind of trying to do the best we can with partnerships. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. So would that work if I kind of send out a Zoom or I'm sorry, not a Zoom, but sort of like a Survey Monkey to kind of see if that would work out for folks. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I apologize, Amy, I have to hop off, but I'm
Nope, it's
supportive
fine.
of that. So yeah, definitely send that poll around, and
Okay.
others can respond as they need to. But thanks everyone for your work. For those of you continuing, I'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Perfect. Thanks, Janet. Okay, all. Well, it's a little unfortunate we've lost Larry. So I guess what I'm going to do is I will call for a motion to adjourn, which is a little unorthodox, but I will call for a motion and a second to adjourn, and then I'll just do a roll call. Unless there's anything else that anybody wants to talk for the good of the order. We're happy to talk about that. All right. Sensing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
No. Perfect. Seconded by Webster. All right. Any discussion? All right. Then I'll take a roll call vote. Christensen,
Aye.
Cronin,
Aye.
Dwyer,
Aye.
Hittner,
Aye.
Shantz, Webster.
Yes, or aye.
It's okay. Sardar.
Aye.
And that motion passes unanimously. Well, thank you all. Thank you so much for your continued efforts. We will continue to keep everyone updated. We'll send out information about, census tracts, and we're all just going to try to do our best in getting an accurate head count. So thank you one and all. And again, Regine, I can't thank you enough for all of your support. So everybody have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Cool.